I'm Ashton Addison from Blockwest Capital for Investment Pitch Media, and today on the Crypto Coin Show we have Philip Shoemaker, the Executive Director of Identitycom. Philip, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking the time today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ashton. Thanks for bringing me here.
Yeah, it's my privilege to have you on. I'm excited to dive into the world of decentralized identities. There's a lot of problems with identity on the internet as it is right now, and there's a lot to be improved. So I'm excited to dive into what Identity.com is doing. But first, before we get into that, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story in blockchain and your transition from Web 2 to Web 3 and how Identity.com fits into that.
Fantastic. Happy to talk about this, and identity is near and dear to my heart. But my background is I was lucky enough to be born and raised in Silicon Valley, right? And my very first company that I went to when I was 18 was a startup, and who's now a huge company. And I bounced from startups to startups. But when I started playing around with the internet, I love the anonymous nature of it, right? Mm-hmm. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, nobody tracking me where I was going, etc. I love the early days. And as we've seen, everything's become so much more different. Everything's centralized now. It's not the way it once was. And, more recently, I built and ran the App Store for Apple. And in doing so, I found that anonymity is great up to a certain point, right? And then we start having issues. So, for example, apps that get put onto the App Store are not necessarily the apps are vetted, but the developers behind those apps are not necessarily vetted. We don't really know who everyone is, and someone can appear and disappear in a matter of minutes, as you know, right? Problems with internet identity. Mm-hmm. And so when I left Apple, I started talking to a bunch of folks in the blockchain space. I was an advocate of blockchain since 2010 when I got my hands on the white paper, invested in a variety of companies like BitGo and 21E6. And those are companies to me that were doing a lot of amazing groundwork for us that we're building on today. And in 2016, 2017, the ICO craze, again, we didn't know who these creators of the next token were, and there were a lot of fraudulent things going on. And I kept thinking, identity has to be able to support this. So I ultimately stumbled upon Civic, loved the work they were doing, met with Vinny Lingham there. We decided to spin off some of the core technology from Civic, create a nonprofit called Identity.com, and that's where we started in 2019. And we've been focusing on that protocol from that point on, and we're a small company. We're trying to solve the decentralized identity problem, like many others. Mm-hmm. But we want to focus on building a community where we use this protocol, we expand this protocol, we compete with Civic. Whoever wants to come on board can join our identity ecosystem and start bringing high quality identities at a low price to the world in large. And I don't mean that I want to use KYC for everything. In fact, let's do KYC for financial transactions where we need to, and let's do something different on the other side. Let's just at least know this person's a human. Let websites know that they're of age or not, things like that. But let's keep that information to ourselves. Let's store it on our own devices. Let's not have any honeypots in the cloud, because I'll tell you what, I'm tired of getting those emails from companies saying that my identity's been hacked yet again.
Definitely. Great intro, Philip. It's an amazing story getting into Bitcoin so early as well. You've seen the transition, and we have had Vinny and Civic on the show multiple times to talk with Civic, and it's such a great use case. And there's so many benefits to bringing identity onto Web3, because as we've seen with all of the exploits and hacks from most of the social media companies and most of the platforms on the internet, your information is on 1,000 different accounts, and they're all vulnerable to be hacked. So I would love to hear a little bit more about how Identity.com is approaching this in the decentralized identity way.
But we are big believers in self-sovereign identity and the Decentralized Identity, the DIDs. We are members of W3C, of DIF, the Decentralized Identity Foundation, and these groups that are help pushing forward standards to be able to make decentralized identity a reality. And for those that don't understand what decentralized identity is, let's just say that you store, it's kind of like not your keys, not your crypto. If you're not storing your own identity on your phone and you grant access to websites and others for specific information, if you're just letting these websites take all your identity and store it in the cloud somewhere, it's essentially the same. It's not your identity anymore, right? They're holding it, it's theirs. And so for me, decentralized identity means let's store it in a place that you have access to it and that you can control the disclosure. Like if you apply at a bank and it asks you, it needs certain information from you, you'll get a note on your phone that says, hey, the bank wants to know your social security number, your age, your name, all this information. And you can say yes or you can say no. But if you say no, you won't get that loan, sure. But you also don't disclose that information. So we embody this, right? This is part of what we believe at our lowest level. So we created this protocol with Civic's help as well. Civic is well involved in this, and it's called the Gateway Protocol. And it's a protocol that allows you to create off-chain identities called DIDs and make them available on-chain. It's pretty simple. What it means is that you go through an identity process that might be just answering a CAPTCHA to prove that you're a human, or it might be doing a document scan to make sure you're over 21 or over 18, or it might mean a full KYC, AML. There's different levels of gatekeepers in these networks that say they need different information. Now, in doing that, you get everything's valid, the ID checks out, the information checks out, then an attestation, a stamp is put on the blockchain that says, yes, this ID was validated by this company on this date and this time. It needs to be refreshed at this point. And then a simple pass just gets added to your wallet. And then any service you go to where you connect that wallet, a check can be made as long as you verify it and you authorize it and say, yes, they can have access to this information. And then that's made available to wherever you are. It could be a decentralized exchange. It could be the metaverse. It could be pretty much anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And one of the great use cases that I have seen starting to pop up, but I feel like it's very early on, because I feel like when you have an identity system, you also need it to be accepted by like the Web2 companies. For example, with just accounts and logons. We've seen login with Facebook, login with Google, sort of make it easy for people to log into a majority of sites. But I've also started to see this now logging in with your Web3 identity, which can attach to, an ENS domain or some kind of blockchain domain. And I'm guessing that the technology that you guys are working with can do this, but how do you get it to be adopted into, the old world?
Yeah, that's and that's the big question for everybody in the Web3 space, right? As we know, logging in into Web3 products right now is throwing your wallet in through an open door, right? And you worry every time you connect with a wallet, you worry that somebody's going to take your goods, right? Take your ape, take your tokens, whatever it is. And so that's a big problem, right? And it's also a lot of ownership. Us owning our own keys, et cetera, of this wallet makes it really difficult, so that we know the ease of use isn't amazing. And so you're absolutely right. We have to get to a better position in the Web3 world, but also the Web2 world needs to be catered to some extent. We need something as easy as a login with Apple, et cetera. I mean, Apple created their login because they were tired of everybody using other logins in their app store. And they said, we gotta ride this bandwagon. We gotta jump on this bandwagon as well and get involved. So that's something that we ultimately need to do. For me, the W3C was pushing a narrative that in the future you would log in with your decentralized identifier. Now, that may sound scary to people, but it's really just a file that's on your device or on your computer that allows you to represent you. And a DID could be Philip Shoemaker with all of my credentials, or it could be a pseudonym that I also write under, and it could be under that name as well. And it doesn't matter. You pick and choose which identity you want to log into this. So for me, logging in with a DID is a way to solve both problems of doing it on for Web3. A DID could use a product like we have called Cryptid that allows you to have a level of indirection between you, your identity, and your wallets, so people can't just easily steal stuff from you. Or it could be a DID that represents a login with Facebook or something along those lines, or it replaces a login with Facebook for those Web2 properties.
And that makes me think of when you're creating, you mentioned this pseudonymity of it and being able to give minimal information. But I'm curious around the authentication of the information and perhaps, for example, giving fake credentials or making multiple identities for people that are bad actors to create a decentralized identity. How does that get vetted, and is that possible for them to use those identities in bad ways?
Yeah, look, I think it's a very valid question. And we find that some of these identity networks care less about trust than we do. Let's just put in our Gateway Protocol white paper, we talk about ultimately Identity.com becoming a DAO to be able to help support these issues. But right now, Identity.com, the company that I represent, we focus a lot on trust, right? The folks that we bring in to validate identities needs to be a trustworthy enterprise, right? I've had a lot of people say, hey, I want to do this out of my garage. I just graduated from college. What can I do? And I have no problem with that. It's just we have to get to a point where there's things like SOC 2 compliance, it's SOC 2 compliance, so we know how they're handling and destroying of data once they're done acquiring it, et cetera. There's a lot of things that we check when a company becomes a gatekeeper or a validator in our network. So right now it's a lot of handholding, right? I talk to a lot of companies to get them to become a validator. We do an integration. Then we check their documents. We check their security. We want to make sure that they're doing all the right things to protect our identity. So for example, imagine if while I was scanning an identity for the system, that the company that validated it stored that ID, right? I mean, to me, that it game over, right? Suddenly there's this honeypot that this company has, and we're trying to eliminate honeypots. So for me, we need to ensure that that's not happening. And so Identity.com spends a lot of time focusing on security and encryption of the data flowing from the phone or from the Mac or a computer to the back end and back and forth, and ensuring that those companies delete. Now that's one piece, right? We want to make sure that these identities are being validated properly. There's no fraud involved. There's no scams. At the same time, there are mistakes made, right? Sometimes these companies use AIs that might scan the document and think it's valid when it's not. We have to know how to handle those scenarios. So we require that gatekeepers stake a certain amount of tokens on our network. And every year we take money out of that. We take some tokens out of that in order to do all the security checks and all the document retention checks, et cetera. But we also use that as if we start finding fraudulent identities, they need to get dinged a certain amount of tokens, right? That makes the most amount of sense. And look, if there's a low threat, I mean, how many bad IDs is too many, right? We have to figure out some rules like that, which is why the DAO needs to get involved. But right now, I say you do it more than twice, you should be out of there, right? I mean, as a validator, if you're issuing bad IDs, we've got to remove you from it, and that's a way to have trust. Now, a next step here is this whole idea of pseudonymity. I would love for people to join our system, put in pseudonyms, as long as they have a real identity that backs them up at some place. Maybe it's on your phone, et cetera. And we know we can zero in on that identity. We can use that as a way of uniqueness checking, right? So let's say you have 7 pseudonyms, you have 7 DIDs that all link back to this one master DID that is your real identity. Nobody gets information of that real identity, but what we can do, what Identity.com's APIs can do, is we can see if you're trying to vote in a DAO 7 times, right? When you should only have 1 vote, we shouldn't allow you to have 7 votes. Those are kind of things that we need to resolve, because I think pseudonymity is the future. I believe that what people are doing in the Web3, we saw in the Bored Ape Yacht Club, right? The four founders were all working under pseudonyms until they got doxxed by a reporter, which was unfair. And suddenly these guys had to start traveling with security details and suddenly telling their families to be on the lookout for scams, which they had no problem doing that when they were just under pseudonyms. And that's the kind of thing I want to be able to handle. So I want to put all the tools in place to support that, right? To support pseudonymity without the scams, without people being able to vote 7 times.
I completely agree, Philip, and I think that's a great point. There's a lot of good actors that are using pseudonyms and just trying to protect, they're not doing anything wrong, just trying to protect their assets, and especially goes for, famous people or founders and project owners or early investors that, they're on Twitter using a pseudonym, and they have all the right to do that because they're not doing anything wrong except trying to protect themselves from bad actors, rather than being bad actors themselves. I think that's a great point. Now, I have another question, which sort of relates to the blockchain side of it. Having a decentralized data management for the identities, does that sit on a blockchain somewhere, and does it sit on a specific blockchain? And yeah, how does that work?
Yeah, so right now, we started out in 2019. We were on Ethereum blockchain, and our smart contracts were running there. We got to the point with the gas prices going up that it just became untenable for the price. So we ended up doing a big look, research, and ended up jumping on a Solana. So right now, Solana is how we handle processing. That's where we basically indicate that your identity has been validated and it's secure, and it's either a good thing or a bad thing, right? Whether it's been approved or rejected. But no PII is stored on the blockchain, right? Nothing personally identifiable is stored there because we know that over time these things will be hackable. They will, quantum computing will ultimately be able to root some of this out. So we didn't want to store anything long-term that's PII related on the blockchain. So right now, the only place it's stored is on your own device, and you're in control of that. Now, moving forward, if you think about it, what's the use case? We talk about user interface. What's the user experience of somebody that bricks their phone, they lose their phone, they drop it in the water, whatever it is, and they have to upgrade, and suddenly there's no backup. What do you do, right? So we want to be able to reissue that, and one way to do that is possibly have your identity stored with keys that you have access to on a decentralized storage network, such as something like Filecoin or Storage. But it has to be GDPR compliant, right? We have to give you the right to be deleted. And so we need to find a system that does that. And it needs to do that in a way that's like AES encrypted, something that is quantum safe encryption. And we are working closely with a few companies on making this happen. But it will always be done with with disclosure to the user, right? We're never going to store data up somewhere that you don't know about. You're going to know everywhere the data is stored. It should only be one place for the most part, maybe 2. And so for us, that's it. But Solana is where we do most of our work. We have a good, close relationship with Solana folks, and we think the work they're doing is incredible. But having said that, we know identity is not a one-chain thing. We need to be cross-chain. And so we're releasing our gateway protocol V2 in the next few weeks. After that, we're going to take more concerted effort on getting us onto some side chains as well, and go back to supporting the EVM.
Great to know, Philip. And I do like the Solana blockchain for the speed and the cost of it. But you're right about the future is multi-chain, and eventually you're going to need interoperability to all these chains. And I'm glad that you sort of segued into that about the plan of going in that direction and how you're looking at expanding. There's so many faucets, though, to how the decentralized identity works, to getting the users onboarded, to actually getting the other side and the companies to accept it, and all the missing parts fitting together. What are, if you look at it from a 2-year perspective, what are the major things that Identitycom has to do to make this more mainstream in Web3?
Great question. I mean, there's so many things we need to do. I'll tell you that the top one is to build out a community of people passionate about identities. And I say that because we're not, even if I triple, quadrupled, I built the team up to 1,000 people, we would not have enough resources to be able to support everything, right? Obviously. And in order to capitalize on a lot of this, I need to bring in a community to be able to help us build this out. And that's one of the big things we're going to be doing for the rest of the year, is focusing a lot on community management, building this out, showing people what we're passionate about, what we're focused on, and give a lot of people use cases on interesting use cases for this type of technology. For example, something that people aren't really aware of is that there is a way to embed a verifiable credential or a decentralized identifier into a document like a PDF or a JPEG, that you can ultimately go back, and it's kind of like a watermark, go back and see who actually owns that identity. Imagine if that was stamped into every image by the artist that put something up into an NFT. You would know when somebody stole that image and used it on a different chain, right? I mean, obviously we see that now, CryptoPunks, CryptoFunks, things like that are happening. But imagine if there was a way to show that. Now, maybe that's against the ethos of some people's thoughts of NFTs, and that's fine. Don't do it in those cases. But imagine if you could also stamp in the owner, the current owner of an NFT, and have that change when you sell it. Have the marketplaces be able to do that. It would prevent things like when Seth Green got his ape stolen a few weeks back, or a few months back. To me, it would help solve those issues, because you would know exactly who the ownership is of. Now, these are just simple use cases. We have hundreds of these in terms of using verifiable credentials and DIDs to handle transactions on the supply chain. Imagine if, there's this comment that 80% of the things you buy through stores, 80% of them have slavery in the supply chain somewhere along the line, whether it's people picking cotton, being forced labor to do T-shirts, et cetera. But it's 80% in the supply chain. So if we could reduce that just by using DIDs throughout the supply chain, handling transactions, seeing the people working on picking the cotton, et cetera, we could help reduce that. So there's so many things there. I need to build up this community to help us solve a lot of these problems. And that's kind of the main focus for us. But more practical, we need to be cross-chain. So V2 of our protocol actually allows us to get paid for doing these transactions, right? We've had it in the system since November. We've just been letting people use it, and Civic's been chugging along, making a lot of progress on that. And we're just not making a percentage or any money through the transaction. So V2 gives us the ability to make money here. Now, it's identity verification services. We're talking pennies per transaction, right? It's not a lot, and it shouldn't be, right? That's why we're a 501c4 nonprofit. We're not in it to make a killing. We're in it to bring goodness into the world. And that's something I want to fix after the App Store, right? I want to start putting good into the world. And for me, this was a way to do it. So we're a 501c4 nonprofit. We're focused on bringing identities to the world, and we're going to continue implementing. And our big goal after the V2 is just multi-chain. We need to start expanding the chains, but look, we're going to do it in a way that makes sense. We're going to do it in a way that we have customers on those chains when we go to them. We have a good amount of customers on the Solana chain right now, and we plan to make good decisions moving forward. I'm looking at where the developers are going, and it's things like Phantom and others. But again, I need to make sure that there's some business there so people can start using our platform immediately. Definitely.
All great points, Philip. And about getting the community involved, I feel like the efforts towards building a DAO, that there's a lot of intricacies of the DAO and the voting, and obviously decentralized identity is going to play a great role in a use case in the Identitycom DAO as well. But getting paid and all these little faucets, I feel like that's a great step in the right direction.
Thank you. And yeah, I think DAOs are the future, right? I'm really happy that Wyoming made a specific law for LLCs being DAOs. I love that. I just think we need to spread that out through the world. And Balaji talks about the network state. I want to combine all this stuff together, have DAOs be their own network state to be able to handle quadratic voting, have identity involved every step of the way. And again, I'm such a believer in pseudonymity that I don't even want, like, if I vote in a DAO, I never want to use my real name ever again. I want to be a pseudonym.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Nope.
I'm looking forward to seeing how that grows out, and I will get involved in it as well. Now, for the viewers that want to learn more about the DAO, decentralized identities, how to get involved, what is the best way for them to learn more on that front?
Yeah, the best way is to hit up Identitycom. Sounds just like or spelled just like it sounds, or hit @identity on Twitter. We try to tweet timely things talking about Tornado and other issues that we've seen in the crypto space in the past. But our website is a bit difficult to read at the moment. It's going to go through an overhaul in about 2 weeks, and so look for the new thing. But our white paper on the gatekeeper is there. I suggest read it. There's a lot of direction there, a lot of talk about our roadmap in the future.
Sounds great, Philip, and I will leave the links in the description box below. Thank you so much for all of your insights on decentralized identities and Identity.com. Let's follow up in the near future.
Sounds great. Thank you, Ashton. Appreciate your time.